Hey, I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior VP, Executive Editor at Large at Black Enterprise. Welcome to a powerful Black Men Excel discussion. Who's going to put me on? Leveraging mentorship to ascend to the C-suite. We have great panelists for this discussion because we're talking about mentorship and, more importantly, sponsorship to advance in organizations in corporate America. These are two key resources that you got to have to make those moves and get to where you want to go. So definitely welcome to the conversation. Rejji Hayes, Executive VP and Chief Financial Officer at CMS Energy Corp and Consumers Energy Company, and Craig Richey, CFO and Enterprise Value and Consulting Lead, Midwest Market Unit for Accenture. So guys, thank you for joining us for this conversation. Let's open up real quick with the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. You know, I tell people mentorship is what you're told to advance in your career. Sponsorship is what people tell the organization to create opportunities for you. But you guys have already run this race. Talk about what those two things are and how they're different and why they're important. Rejji, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think I generally agree with your perspective on that. What I would add, if you think about the specific role of the mentor and sponsor, I actually view mentors as somewhat boundless. And so I've got mentors who I've never actually worked directly with, but they're people who have obtained a level of success in their career that in some way I wanted to emulate, and I just have sought their counsel, sometimes on an unsolicited basis, sometimes through their offering, and they've provided me with counsel throughout my career. And again, in some cases, we've never even worked in the same organization. So I view mentors as fairly boundless. Sponsors, I think to your point, have usually a direct affiliation in some way with the organization with which you work. And so to me, sponsors are generally in the room where it happens, to borrow a quote from a favorite musical. And I've seen sponsors who, when they like somebody and like what they're doing and view them as talented, they will advocate on behalf of that person when it comes to good assignments, promotion, lateral moves, things of that nature. And so sponsorship can have a direct impact on your success within a particular organization, and mentors can be outside of those organizations and just give you good counsel throughout your life. So that's my take on it.
You want to jump in here, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rejji said it, very well in terms of the difference between a mentor and sponsor. When I look at mentors, they're kind of coaches, right? And those coaches, I'm going through my journey. There's different plays that you can play. So really getting that perspective. And to Rejji's point, the mentors are not somebody always that you're directly working for. I have clients that are mentors. I have family members that are mentors. Other relationships. So it's not just within the world that you work, but they're really people that you're getting perspective. They know you a little bit intimately and kind of where your journey is. So just really helping you kind of, helping you from the side, just giving you a little bit different perspective as you kind of look at the choices going forward, versus a sponsor, which is just so critical for success within the company or within the domain that you play. And that's really that person that when you're not in the room, that they can speak up for you. And so, sometimes that sponsor may, you still have to build that relationship with those sponsors and give them information, right? In terms of how you're doing, the things you're thinking about. But when people are looking at those bigger positions going forward in a company, they're really going to kind of speak up on your behalf on a positive way. And also then some of the times there's chatter that can be negative as you go through your career. And they're going to stand up and say, well, that's not the person that I know. Here's the person that I know, and this is what they can achieve.
I want to put forth this idea, and tell me if it's, you reality check me on this. The deeper you go into your career, the higher you go up in the hierarchy of an organization. It's not that mentorship doesn't matter at all, but sponsorship becomes more and more important as it's less about skills and credentials and more about relationships and your reputation inside an organization or an industry. Is that on point? And what can you tell our audience about why it's important to recognize that and cultivate relationships early on as you advance in your profession?
Yeah, I would say that it's extremely to cultivate for a long period of time. It's not like you build a relationship once and you kind of leave it alone. I think one of the things that we're all taught is work hard, do well within your craft and deliver. That's great. It's a lot of work, but building sponsorship takes a lot of work as well, right? Because the reality is that you're asking somebody to use their individual capital to speak on your behalf. So they're going to think about it from a risk reward equation as well, right? Because a lot of those sponsors obviously that are a higher level, they're still, some of them are growing within their career to, different options internally in a company and outside sometimes, but they really have to believe in you that they can put their capital in line for you. So, and as you grow in your career, it definitely changes. And I think it also expands as well, because the sponsor that you may deal with within your specific area is extremely important, but also that sponsor will help you build relationships with other key sponsors going forward in other areas in that company as well. And I think you need that full field of difference of people to help you as you grow up through your career.
Yeah, let me hit on that, if I may, Alfred, that
Yes.
last point, which Craig mentioned it, and I think it's critically important. One of the roles of a sponsor, and really a mentor as well, is to help the mentee or person you're sponsoring broaden his or her network within the company, and in some cases outside the company, because that's how you can just broaden the coalition of people who support you. And to circle back to the original premise of the question, what I'd also add is that it's interesting. So now that I'm a CFO of a public company, we have 8,500 coworkers within my purview. And the finance team, I've got about a little under 300. And then I chair the board of a bank, which is a subsidiary that has another 300. So I've got about 600 people underneath me. And when we get in the room and start talking about which folks we think are prepared to be at the officer level, if they're not in my function, I get maybe 5 to 10 data points a year with them, where I see them present to me every now and then. And so I'm going to be heavily reliant and almost deferential to those who speak on their behalf, who can say, okay, I've seen this person do A, B, and C, and this is where they added values. In the absence of sponsorship, it's very difficult to offer any credible data points for people who don't get sort of direct observations of that person. So that's why it's critically important, particularly the higher you go, that you have a broad coalition of sponsors who can provide that insight and data points to people who have huge scopes of responsibility and a lot of people under them, because they're just not going to have visibility on what you're doing. And sponsors provide that clarity and that visibility on your behalf.
Yeah, and Rejji, I would just add real quick on that. I mean, I think the purview point that you brought up is pretty significant, and why sponsorship is very important, because as you start to grow, everybody kind of starts to look the same to some extent on those different data points. So if you don't have sponsors as well as mentors that have those precise data points and are preparing this for you, it's hard to shine, right? So because you can only trust, you're trusting what people are providing to you. So that's why it becomes very important, back to the other question, to cultivate those relationships on both sides, and making sure that when those, we're going through the year-end performance process right now, looking at thousands of people, they all start to look alike, right? And so I think the key there is that you need to make sure that as you grow those two key components to help you in your career, making sure that you're giving the data points to help you stand out as well. And it goes across boundaries as well. So key point in my opinion.
So we know performance is critical, and it never stops being critical. So most of us come from probably often a family tradition, a community tradition of work hard to get ahead. Just kind of part of our culture as Black people. That's at the same time, hard work alone is not going to get you there, especially as you again move up into the organization. Let's get to where the rubber hits the road. How do you, in a company, in an organization where often you may be one of the few Black men, one of the few Black people, period, one, choose the right mentors and obviously and sponsors, and they're not all going to look like you. Most of them may not look like you. Right. But more importantly, to your point about standing out for the right reasons, get them to choose you. Because sometimes the person that's backing you up in the room that you're not in, it may not even be the person you think it is. Often you don't know who your sponsor is until later, when you find out that somebody really spoke up on your behalf that you may not even realize was paying attention to the work that you were doing. So talk about this challenge of, especially people early in their careers, who are saying, how do I choose or get chosen? How do I find mentors and sponsors? Or how do I get them to find and recognize me?
Yeah, so let me start, if I may. And I always say that it's very important to exhibit what I view as sort of core fundamentals every single day you walk into the office or organization, and that is exhibit competence, work ethic, and integrity. And as you get more senior, exhibit leadership skills. And you basically have an opportunity every day, every week, every month, every quarter to make your own business case. And if you exhibit that, and you have to be objective, and you have to really give yourself a self-assessment periodically, and just seek out input from mentors and sponsors to see how you're doing. But if you can objectively say that you're exhibiting those skills on a day-to-day basis, well, then the sponsors and mentors will materialize. But you also have to seek them out too. Because I want to go back to this really important point Craig offered up in the prior question. When you get to the higher levels, the skill sets almost get to some extent commoditized. Think about it from a sports analogy. At the NFL level, everybody's fast. Everybody's very athletic. Everybody's strong. And that's the same thing in the executive world. Everyone presents well. Everybody works hard. Everybody has a pretty good level of expertise and competence in whatever their respective field is. And so the bar gets higher. And so you have to exhibit those qualities at an early stage. And you have to make people aware that you're doing good things. And so it's difficult. I know a lot of people naturally are humble, and it requires self-promotion. And that's not a comfortable thing. But again, think about the number of data points that folks like Craig and I have. Like, I have 600 people that I'm thinking of or thinking about, and I've got direct reports. I've got peers and all sorts of other folks I interface with on a daily basis. And so attention spans are very short. And so you have to keep people who are quite busy, and usually mentors and sponsors are people senior to you. And so there's a direct correlation in their seniority and level of work, and you have to keep them abreast of how you're doing. So that's what I would offer there.
Yeah, and I know, Rejji, keeping people abreast is a lot of work as well, right? So, you can deliver your work every day, but the other side is just as hard, in my opinion, as you kind of go up through your career. I think the process kind of changes as when you start in the beginning, then you get to the middle, and you get to places like where your Rejji is. The beginning, it's you really have to, I would say, hone your craft, right? And just really operate at a top level. But the one thing we also have to remember is that it's continuous. So there's continuous learning. So just because you did, great last year is not indicative of what's going to set the frame for next year. So you can't just stop learning. So learning and continually building, your craft. And I think the piece that becomes critical as you grow is sharing your craft with others. So when you have ideas and you're thinking of new things, share those with your peers as well, because you need to have a good relationship with your peers, but also share those ideas with execs above, because I think people are looking for those people that provide insight, and it's not about being right, but it's really forcing yourself to engage in the conversation. And so I think when you're starting to engage in providing insight, because I think people feel like you want to help, you're trying to help others be successful, I think you start to now mature to that next level where people are going to start the mentorship and then, the sponsorship. So I think really thinking through that process and capability plus curiosity, which then you're always providing ideas and helping others, I think it goes a long way. I think the challenge there, which I think a lot of African Americans, we get challenged, is trust. Who do you trust as you go through that process? And that's one where, I don't know, Rejji, that sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. And because you just don't know, but you always have to kind of put yourself out there a little bit.
That's exactly right. And that's why, at least in my career, going back to your question, Alfred, I have really tried to have as broad a coalition of mentors, sponsors, and advocates as possible. And so, do not limit yourself to people who look like you. I think it's important in the event your organization has folks at the senior level who look like you to seek their input and counsel, because more often than not, they can give you very direct feedback. But I do think, again, if you're thinking about the room where it happens, where the big decisions are made, there's usually a good deal of homogeneity and generally concentration of one particular race, and I'll say limited amount of folks who look like us. And so it's really important to have that broad coalition, seek as many mentors as possible, and people who can speak, again, to sponsorship on your behalf in that room.
And is it also part of this, building and maintaining this relationships, is to recognize that you're talking about feedback, not necessarily cheerleading. And so that means sometimes the feedback are going to be things you don't want to hear, things you don't actually agree with, things that we have to, again, manage our own self-image as we navigate toward our goals and our objectives in our careers and our professions. Talk about what it means when you're told something you don't want to hear. You're told you're falling short. You're told that you didn't handle the situation well, or you're told that I wouldn't recommend you or push you for that particular opportunity. It's important not to burn bridges and to be able to handle that as well as you can handle when they say you're the greatest thing and I'm going to push for you.
Yeah, I think that, I think this is actually another kind of key element as you're kind of building your mentorship and sponsorship. When it comes to feedback, we're in a world now where I feel like a lot of people don't really give feedback because they're scared about the response, right? So when I'm going through and some of the people that I mentor and I'm helping them on a couple of their, their projects out in the field, they're working with other people. I ask them to really focus in on the conversation, not about all the things that you're doing great, but what are the things that you need to improve on? And if someone's not really sharing something you can't, there's a problem, right? So because that means you haven't really gotten to the point where that next level of that relationship. So I think that's where, feedback and being active in that communication process, it becomes very critical. Because if you don't get that feedback, the problem is it will start to set you back over time within your career. So but you have to be very active, and that's where trust comes in. And I think as you're, if I was, telling Rejji something, I'd be like, here is direct. I would ask for that feedback, and if they're not, you need to figure out a different way to get to that information to help you be successful.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, there's no substitute for direct affinity with somebody, because usually with higher affinity, it leads to the more explicit feedback. So think of the highest level of affinity you have. That's within your family. And my parents, my wife, my sister, they give me very explicit feedback. And so you want to have that level of affinity with mentors and sponsors where they can give you that really, really objective counsel. And generally what I've tried to focus on, it's not comfortable to Craig's point, but you really want to hear the areas for improvement and say, look, I want to do well in this organization. What do I need to do? What am I exhibiting now or not exhibiting that I could really improve upon? And then how do I go about doing that? And so I think that's critically important. I'll give you an example of this. I remember at some point, probably a little less than 12 years ago, when I got into the corporate sector and went from investment banking into power and energy and started to get sort of just this vision of becoming a CFO longer term, I sought out one of my mentors, not a sponsor. We didn't work together, but we did previously, but a mentor. And I said, I know you were CEO of a public company. I do have ambitions of becoming a CFO. Do you have any counsel? Because I'm working at a corporation, I'm in treasury, and it just seems like a type of role where I think I could longer term succeed. And he told me flat out, I couldn't see you as a CFO. And I tried to ask him to elaborate and unpack it. And he gave me some information. And those are some things for me to think through as I went on this journey. And so fortunately, I didn't take full heed of his advice of why he didn't think I could be a CFO, but I certainly made a mental note of some of the things which in his mind really didn't paint that picture when he thought of me. And so again, it wasn't comfortable having that discussion. I didn't appreciate it, but I did noodle on it. And I definitely think whatever feedback you get, and you have to think about the credibility of the source, really take the time to absorb it and really do your own assessment. It's really important to be dispassionate and objective when it comes to thinking through, particularly the areas of weakness, because I think if someone's going to take the time to share it, then they've observed something and you should give it some level of credence.
So yeah, and Rejji, I mean, what you said is just so key to success, and it's very hard to hear sometimes. And I will tell you, in the beginning of my career, I think I didn't listen to some of that stuff, which held me back. And so I had to start open my eyes in terms of here's the things that I may not see, but someone else has a perspective on. Give it some truth, right? There's something there, right? So it's those things that are very critical in terms of how I communicate, or who are the people that are on my team, how do I deal with them, right? How do I act, the term active listening, be more of an active listener versus always be out front. And sometimes you don't know those things because you're in the moment, and other people are observers. They're going to see things that you don't see. So those things are extremely powerful. So in that example, Rejji, you're talking about that information that was provided is one reason probably why you're here today, right? Because you handle that circumstance. And I think the key, when you've arrived and have a mentor or a sponsor, when they start calling you before you call them. So now you've moved to a different level where they're providing perspective when you haven't reached out. So those are the types of clues and techniques, but you got to use it. So
one of the things I tell the people I mentor is that the more challenging feedback, I'll use the term haters. I tell people your quote unquote haters, which is just people telling you things you don't want to hear, are actually more honest with you often than the ones that are telling you what you want to hear, because people obviously have a natural affinity to want to make people feel good. So I tell people, if you hear something you don't want to hear, don't automatically dismiss it. As you said, Craig, and both of you said it, stop and look. Maybe they see something you don't see, and they just they're honest enough to tell you when maybe other people see the same thing and just like you too much to tell you what they see. In the remaining time we have, I really want to talk about, should let's say Black men in corporate America be emboldened by the current climate where there seems to be an appetite now for more honest discussion about racial equity, opportunity, justice, fairness, both inside corporate America and outside corporate America? Is this really a window of opportunity to really lean into building relationships, lean into identifying and engaging with potential sponsors and mentors? And if so, what would be your recommendations to people to really not lay back and hope to be discovered, but to really proactively cultivate healthy relationships for their careers?
Yeah, I would certainly suggest, Alfred, that this is certainly a window of opportunity, but I would just say, broadly speaking, you should do this throughout your career, irrespective of what's taking place at a macro perspective. I rarely see, or let me say it this way, the ceiling for the brilliant wallflower is capped, and it's quite low. And so it just behooves you to go and seek out mentors, seek out sponsors, make people know what you're doing and how well you're doing, and also make sure they tell you what your blind spots are and your weaknesses. So you should do that throughout your career. But when I look at the current environment, where over the last 3 to 4 months, there's been this inflection point in the dialogue around systemic racism and social injustice, there certainly is a broader appetite at the corporate level to, I'll say, get on the right side of history with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I feel fortunate to work for a company like CMS Energy, where we've been on this journey for some time. And we've certainly reacted to some extent to the inflection point, but we have been putting in the spade work for some time to have a DE&I strategy. And so we don't feel like we've been all that flat-footed in this environment, but there's certainly an opportunity. A number of organizations are looking to broaden their pipeline, think through how to attract and retain the best professionals, how to diversify their management team, their board, and their entire organization to, at a minimum, look like the representation we have across the country, and also impress upon their supply chain that they need to espouse the same values that the organization has. And we are certainly doing that within CMS Energy, where we expect our suppliers and vendors, where we spend $2+ billion a year through the supply chain, that we expect not only to have more diverse suppliers in that mix, but also those that are majority owned, that they reflect the same values that we have when it comes to DE&I. So that's, I'd say it's an opportunity, but the reality is, again, I'll go back to how folks think at this altitude. Attention spans are very short. And there will be a post-pandemic period where we get back to some level of normal. And I don't know how long this appetite, this, I'll say, a moment of clarity will last. For CMS, I can assure you it's going to last, but I don't know about other organizations, because attention spans are short, and inevitably, given how dynamic the world is, focus will shift elsewhere. So certainly strike while the iron's hot, but in general, you should do this throughout your career.
Yeah, I mean, well said, Rejji. I mean, I think there's still the first piece. You got to be, capable, work on your craft, and you can't be the wallflower, right? You still got to continually active to build those relationships, both for mentors and executive sponsors. That just has to happen. I mean, and because regardless of what you look like, if you don't have those two, you're not going to get to the next level. So we should continue that. On the second one, we are in a moment, right? And we can. How long that moment will last, there's probably different, bets in terms of how long that will be. And so I think there is a time where there is heightened awareness. And I think when you look at, and we should use that, honestly, we should use that time of heightened awareness. From an Accenture standpoint, I give our leadership team, Julie Sweet and Ellen Shook and others just amazing kudos in terms of what they've done, because not only when you looked at from a gender perspective, we were one of the first companies to go out and put metrics out there, and we've seen a significant amount of, women that are in leadership roles, right? So that process is going. And then in my role as also the executive sponsor for the African American, employee resource group within Accenture in North America, we just went out, with our board, and we set targets and metrics for both, African American, Latinx folks for Accenture in all aspects of our business. So I think that's just showing the commitment. We're putting, targets. A lot of people, targets matter because people, measure back to those. When you look at the plans that we're putting together to kind of increase our numbers, not only within growing people, but also, at the top levels of the company, we're building those within our plans. So when we're going through talent reviews, succession planning, performance achievement, there is, that component is looked at as we assess how we're going to grow that talent. So I think that we've done amazing things before. I think we're doing amazing things now, but still the journey's not going to get easy, and we recognize that. So you still have to getting back to the first point, as an individual, you still have to develop those mentors and sponsors, because if you don't have that, I don't care what a metric is, you're not going to be able to get to that next level. They're going to pick somebody else.
You guys perfectly connected the dots between performance, mentorship, sponsorship, and then the long-term succession planning goals, targets of a larger organization tied to the corporation's performance. And obviously, if you can connect those dots during the course of your career, you're in a good place. And obviously, mentorship and sponsorship are just key links in those chains. So in the time we have left, really quick, each of you, and I'll start with you, Craig, and we'll finish with you, Rejji. How about like 2 takeaways for, let's say, early careerists, people in the first third of their career, who are really trying to leverage mentorship and sponsorship to move to the next level? What are 2 takeaways you'd leave with?
I think that in the early part of your career, capability matters. So making sure that you're at the top of your craft and you're letting people see that. Because I don't care what you look like, if people perceive that you don't have that, you're not going to rise any further. So really focusing on not only demonstrating, but the piece that we don't do really well is communicating that to others. On the second piece, as I've kind of grown after that level, and it's the hardest one, it's trust. There's times where you're going to have to confide with people that you may not know well in terms of what you're experiencing or some of the things that you're going through, and asking questions about how to get to that next level. You're just going to have to trust that, there's a lot of good in people, right? And by the way, you can't just pick one, you got to pick multiple people. But I think trust is a hard thing when you're sharing a little bit of, hey, I may not have the exact right answer, but I think that when you do that well, and you believe in, going out on a limb a little bit, it goes huge ways in terms of building those sponsors and mentors. But trust is hard, in my opinion, when it's somebody you may not know well.
Rejji?
Yeah, I would say 2 things. I'd say one, without a doubt, particularly early in your career, I got this counsel myself: get comfortable being uncomfortable. Critically important to broaden your comfort zone. So for some people, I think actually quite a few people, public speaking is a bit of a block or a challenge or an issue. Get used to that at an early stage, whether that's going to Toastmasters or finding opportunities to present something that is of great interest to you where it doesn't feel as uncomfortable. Get a lot of that out of the way early in your career. Because again, as we talked about, when you start getting to the highest levels, those are expected to be sort of commoditized skills that everyone has. So yes, of course, they work very hard, they're competent, they present well. Everyone has that. And so early in your career, whatever that deficiency is, and again, if you have that objective, dispassionate conversation with yourself about what you're good at, what your areas of comfort are, and what you're not so good at, and what those areas of discomfort are, work on those earlier in your career. Second, and this goes to Craig's good point about just getting really good at something in the earlier stage of your career and some level of expertise or a high level of competence. It's much easier to do that when you are passionate and have great interest in the field that you're in. And so don't chase the herd. When you get out of undergrad, everyone says, banking, management, consulting, and now probably tech and whatever the flavor of the month is. Do not follow the herd, do not follow the money. Follow what is of interest to you, because if it's of interest, it will not feel like work taking time to perfect that craft, and that will differentiate you. Because I found out for some time, and it was through a good level of trial and error and going into other fields I didn't like so much earlier in my career, I actually realized that I actually do like corporate finance, thinking about capital structure, tax implications, all the stuff CFOs do. That's really interesting. I don't mind looking at that on a Saturday or Sunday. I find it endlessly fascinating, and you have to find what's of interest, because it aligns with counsel that a mentor gave me many years ago. Because when you think about the average professional career, when you get out of school, it's about 40 to 45 years. And think of that as currency and spend it wisely. If someone said you had $40 to $45 to spend for your entire life, you'd think very hard about how you spent each of those dollars. And so your career should be the same way. So pursue what is of interest to you, and that will allow you to excel, because it won't feel like work when you perfect your craft.
Guys, just so on point. This conversation, obviously, I always tell people, every conversation you hear at a good conference needs to continue after a conference or an event. But you've given some great strategies about how to leverage mentorship. And again, I'm glad we spoke even more about sponsorship, because when you're talking about advancing again to higher levels, to the C-suite, if you will, sponsorship is so critical, but it's not something that's talked about enough, I think, professionally. I mean, everybody wants a mentor, everybody loves mentors, but it really is about the sponsorship on top and in addition to the mentorship. So Rejji, Craig, thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your candidness, which is really important in this environment. Listen, everybody, you want to stay in touch with Rejji and Craig. We'll be doing live chat right after this session. So join us there. And thank you for coming to this session. Who's going to put you on? Leveraging mentorship to ascend to the C-suite. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr.
Thank you.
Thank you.